The mansion had more security guards than most banks. Black SUVs lined the circular driveway. Men dressed in tailored suits spoke into earpieces while scanning every passing vehicle. Every window reflected wealth, power, and secrets. Yet inside those towering walls, silence had become the loudest sound of all. The woman standing at the front gate had no idea she was about to change everything. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't looking for love. She only needed a job. But before the sun set on that ordinary Monday morning, she would walk into the home of the city's most feared mafia boss and unknowingly step into the emptiest heart anyone had ever hidden. How could a young cleaning lady become the one person capable of reaching a man everyone else feared? The answer began years before she ever knocked on that front door. Her name was Emma Carter. At 24 years old, Emma had mastered something few people ever learned. She knew how to smile while carrying unbearable pain. Every morning before sunrise, she left the tiny apartment she rented on the edge of town. The building was old, the elevator rarely worked, and the heating failed every winter. Yet she never complained. Complaining never paid the rent. Life had taught Emma difficult lessons long before adulthood. Her father had passed away when she was 12. Her mother spent years battling illness before leaving the world just weeks after. Emma graduated from high school. College became an impossible dream. Bills arrived faster than opportunities. Since then, Emma had worked everywhere anyone would hire her. Coffee shops, hotels, restaurants, laundry services, housekeeping companies. She never stayed in one place very long because every paycheck disappeared before she could save enough to breathe. Despite everything, there was one thing poverty never managed to steal: her kindness. Neighbors often wondered how someone with so little always found ways to help others. She carried groceries for elderly residents. She volunteered at the local shelter whenever her schedule allowed. She secretly bought school supplies for children whose parents couldn't afford them. No cameras, no applause, just quiet acts of compassion. Perhaps that was because Emma remembered exactly what it felt like when someone offered kindness during the darkest days of her own childhood. One rainy afternoon, after finishing another exhausting shift cleaning office buildings, she received a phone call from her supervisor. "There is a special assignment tomorrow." Emma balanced the phone against her shoulder while unlocking her apartment door. "What kind of assignment?" The client requested someone reliable. Emma laughed softly. Reliable usually means difficult. Very difficult. Silence lingered on the other end. Then the supervisor lowered her voice. "The house belongs to someone important." Emma frowned. "A celebrity?" "No." "A politician?" "Worse." The answer came almost as a whisper. "The Moretti estate." Emma froze. Everyone knew that name. Vincent Moretti, the businessman whose companies appeared on magazine covers. The mysterious billionaire who almost never attended public events. The man surrounded by rumors darker than midnight. Some called him a criminal. Others called him untouchable. No one seemed to know where the truth ended and the legends began. Emma had seen his face only once in a newspaper. Sharp jaw, cold gray eyes, perfectly tailored black suit. A man who looked less like someone living life and more like someone surviving it. "I don't think that's a good idea," Emma admitted. "The pay is triple." She stopped speaking. Triple. That amount could cover nearly 2 months of rent. It could repair her aging car. It could finally replace the broken refrigerator that buzzed through every night. "You only need to clean the house twice a week." And the catch: the owner dislikes strangers. Emma smiled nervously. "That doesn't sound comforting." "The house manager says if he doesn't like you, you'll never be invited back." Emma looked around her tiny apartment. Peeling paint, empty refrigerator, unpaid electricity bill resting on the kitchen table. Sometimes fear became a luxury poor people couldn't afford. "I'll take it." The next morning, dark clouds drifted across the sky as Emma arrived outside the massive iron gates. Everything about the estate felt intimidating. The gardens looked perfectly maintained. Ancient oak trees surrounded the property like silent guardians. The mansion itself stood on a hill overlooking the city. Elegant enough to belong in a movie, yet strangely lifeless. A guard checked her identification before opening the gates. Another escorted her toward the front entrance. No one smiled. No one made conversation. It felt less like arriving at a home and more like entering a fortress. Inside, polished marble floors stretched endlessly beneath crystal chandeliers. Every piece of furniture looked priceless. Every painting belonged in a museum. Yet despite all the luxury, the mansion felt empty, cold, as though happiness had packed its belongings years ago and never returned. An older gentleman approached with calm professionalism. "My name is Robert." He extended his hand. "I manage the estate." Emma smiled politely. "It's nice to meet you." Robert nodded. "There are only two rules." Emma listened carefully. "You will never enter the West Wing." She nodded. "And if Mr. Moretti asks you a question, answer honestly." She blinked. "That's all." Robert hesitated. He values honesty more than perfection. Those words stayed with Emma longer than she expected. Before beginning, Robert quietly added one final sentence. "You may hear rumors about the man who owns this house." Emma looked toward the grand staircase. "I already have." Robert sighed. "Most people judge him before meeting him." His expression carried something unexpected. Not fear, not admiration, sympathy. That single emotion made Emma wonder whether the stories she'd heard were missing an important chapter. Hours passed quietly. Emma dusted shelves, polished windows, and vacuumed rooms larger than her entire apartment. Yet something unusual caught her attention. The house contained almost no personal photographs, no family portraits, no smiling vacations, no birthdays, nothing. It looked less like someone's home and more like an expensive hotel, where nobody truly lived. Then she entered the library. Thousands of books lined towering shelves. History, poetry, philosophy, classical literature. Every volume had been carefully arranged. Emma smiled. Books always revealed pieces of a person's soul. As she carefully dusted a shelf, one novel slipped from her hands. It landed with a dull thud. She quickly knelt to pick it up. Another book beside it tilted forward. Then another. Within seconds, an entire section collapsed onto the hardwood floor. The loud crash echoed throughout the mansion. Emma closed her eyes. Wonderful. First day, first disaster. Footsteps approached. Slow, measured, heavy. She looked up. A tall man stood in the doorway. Black suit, dark hair touched with the faintest hint of silver near the temples. Strong shoulders. Expression unreadable. But it was his eyes that stopped time. Cold gray. Not angry. Simply exhausted. They belonged to someone who hadn't truly rested in years. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them. Emma hurried to gather the fallen books. "I'm so sorry." He remained motionless. It was an accident. Still nothing. She expected shouting. Dismissal. Perhaps security escorting her outside. Instead, the man slowly walked toward the scattered novels. Without saying a word, he bent down. He picked up the nearest book. Then another. Emma stared in disbelief. The feared Mafia boss was helping a cleaning lady clean up her own mistake. When the final book returned to the shelf, he looked at the title resting in Emma's hands. A weathered copy of Pride and Prejudice. His voice was calm. "You've read it." Emma nodded carefully. 3 times. A nearly invisible smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Most people judge it without opening it." Emma answered before thinking. People often do the same thing to each other. For the first time in a very long time. Vincent Moretti looked genuinely surprised. Neither of them realized it then. But inside that silent library, among shelves filled with forgotten stories, a new one had quietly begun. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant sky, and somewhere beyond the mansion walls, people who wanted Vincent Moretti destroyed had already begun watching every person who entered his life, including the young woman whose greatest weapon had never been strength, only an ordinary heart that refused to stop believing in goodness. Emma left the library that afternoon believing she had simply survived an awkward first meeting. She had no idea. Vincent Moretti spent the next several minutes standing in complete silence, staring at the shelf where the books had fallen. Not because of the accident, because of what she had said. People often do the same thing to each other. No one had spoken to him that way in years. Not with fear, not with admiration, not because they wanted something. Just honestly. For a man whose entire world revolved around deception, honesty felt strangely unfamiliar. Emma, meanwhile, returned to work. The mansion still had dozens of rooms to clean, and she intended to finish every task before leaving. She treated every house the same, whether it belonged to a billionaire or a retired schoolteacher. She dusted carefully. She folded blankets neatly. She straightened chairs that no one seemed to use. But the more she worked, the more one thought refused to leave her mind. This house wasn't dirty because its owner neglected it. It was lonely. Luxury surrounded every room, yet almost nothing suggested joy. The dining table could seat 20 people. Only one chair showed signs of regular use. The home theater looked untouched. The grand piano in the music room carried a thin layer of dust, as if no hands had rested upon its keys in years. Even the fireplace seemed forgotten. It was as though someone had built a palace but forgotten to fill it with life. Emma couldn't explain why that realization saddened her. She had entered expecting the home of a ruthless man. Instead, she found the home of someone who appeared to exist rather than live. Just before finishing for the day, Robert approached with his usual composed expression. "Mr. Moretti has approved your return." Emma blinked. "That's it." Robert allowed himself the smallest smile. "That is more significant than it sounds. Does he usually dismiss people?" "Usually before lunch." Emma laughed softly. "I suppose breaking his library wasn't the worst first impression." "No." Robert looked toward the second floor. "Oddly enough, it may have been the best." Over the following weeks, Tuesday and Friday became Emma's days at the estate. The routine settled naturally. She arrived shortly after sunrise. The guards greeted her with respectful nods instead of suspicious stares. Robert assigned her different sections of the mansion. Vincent remained mostly unseen. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of him crossing a hallway while speaking quietly into a phone. Sometimes she saw him leaving in one of the black SUVs before dawn. Other days he disappeared entirely. The rumors surrounding him remained impossible to ignore. Television news occasionally mentioned organized crime investigations. Business magazines praised his growing empire. Online articles described him as dangerous. Employees described him as demanding but fair. None of the stories matched completely. Emma eventually stopped trying to decide which version was true. People were rarely as simple as headlines suggested. One rainy afternoon, she noticed something unusual. A vase in the entrance hall contained flowers. Fresh white lilies. 2 days later, the flowers had wilted. No one replaced them. The following week, while grocery shopping after work, Emma paused beside the floral section. She wasn't thinking about Vincent. She was thinking about the house. Without quite understanding why, she spent $5 from her own pocket on a bundle of fresh wildflowers. Nothing expensive, just cheerful yellow daisies mixed with blue cornflowers. The next morning, she cleaned the entrance hall as usual, then quietly removed the dying lilies. She washed the crystal vase, filled it with fresh water, arranged the simple bouquet, stepped back, smiled. The room instantly felt warmer. No one saw her do it. She expected no thanks. Several hours later, Vincent walked through the foyer after returning from a meeting. He stopped. His eyes rested on the flowers. "They weren't here yesterday." Robert nodded. "No." "Who changed them?" "The new housekeeper." Vincent studied the arrangement. "They aren't expensive." "No." "They are happy." Robert smiled faintly. "That appears to have been the intention." Vincent said nothing else. But he didn't ask for them to be removed. Emma continued adding small touches whenever she worked. She straightened crooked paintings, opened curtains to let sunlight into forgotten rooms, placed cushions neatly instead of stiffly. She never rearranged the house. She simply made it feel lived in. Weeks later, Robert quietly admitted something remarkable. "The staff smiles more." Emma looked surprised. "What changed?" "You." She laughed. "I only clean." "No." Robert shook his head. "You remind people this is supposed to be a home." Those words lingered with her all day. Not everyone appreciated the change. One evening, as Emma prepared to leave, 2 men in expensive suits entered the mansion. Unlike Robert, they carried themselves with the confidence of men accustomed to giving orders. Their eyes swept across the foyer before settling on Emma. One of them frowned. "Who's she?" Robert answered calmly. "The housekeeper." The taller man looked her up and down. "Vincent is hiring strangers now." Emma pretended not to hear. But every instinct told her these men weren't ordinary business partners. Their smiles never reached their eyes. Before climbing the staircase, one of them glanced back. People close to powerful men rarely stay ordinary. The remark felt less like conversation and more like a warning. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She replayed the encounter repeatedly. She reminded herself she cleaned houses. Nothing more. Whatever business Vincent conducted had nothing to do with her. Still, something about those men unsettled her. The next morning, while volunteering at the neighborhood shelter, she found herself distracted. Mrs. Alvarez, an elderly volunteer who had known Emma for years, noticed immediately. Heavy thoughts. Emma smiled weakly. Just work. The new house. Emma nodded. It's beautiful. But it feels like everyone there is carrying secrets. Mrs. Alvarez chuckled gently. Every family carries secrets. This feels different. The older woman placed canned food onto a shelf. There are two kinds of people who become lonely. Emma listened. The first push everyone away because they stop caring. And the second? They push everyone away because they're afraid they'll lose them. Emma looked thoughtful. Which one do you think lives in that mansion? Mrs. Alvarez smiled. Only someone inside the house can answer that. Days later, Emma arrived to discover the estate unusually quiet. Robert met her at the entrance. He was injured. Emma's heart skipped. What happened? Nothing life-threatening. She relaxed slightly. There was an incident. He clearly had no intention of explaining further. Emma respected that. Still, concern lingered. She found herself cleaning more quietly than usual. As she passed the library, she noticed the door standing open. Vincent sat near the fireplace. His left hand was wrapped in fresh bandages. A faint bruise marked his cheek. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. She hesitated before continuing past. Miss Carter. She stopped. He rarely addressed her directly. Yes, Mr. Moretti. His eyes remained on the fire. Did you buy those flowers? She considered pretending otherwise. Instead, she remembered Robert's advice. He valued honesty. Yes. Why? Emma answered simply. Because the house looked like it had forgotten spring. Silence. She immediately worried she had overstepped. Then Vincent asked another question. What if I preferred winter? Emma looked toward the window where rain traced slow paths down the glass. I don't think anyone prefers winter forever. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Vincent gave a barely noticeable nod. You may continue replacing them. Emma smiled. They'll always be inexpensive. His lips almost curved. I wasn't worried about the price. As the weeks turned into months, conversations slowly became less awkward. Never long, never personal, just fragments. What book are you reading? Do you always hum while working? Why do you volunteer on weekends? Each answer revealed tiny pieces of Emma's character. She loved classic novels because they reminded her that hope survived every generation. She hummed because silence made lonely places feel heavier. She volunteered because someone once helped her family when they had nothing. Vincent rarely spoke about himself. Yet Emma noticed things. He always thanked the kitchen staff. He remembered every employee's name. He ensured every worker left before severe storms. When one gardener's daughter became ill, Vincent quietly paid every hospital bill without allowing anyone to know. The newspapers never reported those things. Rumors never mentioned them. Perhaps because kindness wasn't nearly as interesting as fear. Still, Emma sensed a storm approaching. The two men she'd seen weeks earlier began visiting more often. Every time they arrived, the atmosphere inside the mansion changed. Conversations stopped. Guards became more alert. Robert looked increasingly worried. And one evening, while carrying clean towels past Vincent's office, Emma accidentally overheard a single sentence spoken through the half-open door. If she stays here, she'll become a weakness. The words were followed by complete silence. Emma didn't know who they were talking about, but for reasons she couldn't explain, a chill ran through her heart. She quietly continued walking, unaware that, for the first time in years, Vincent Moretti was preparing to make a decision that could either protect the one person who had brought warmth back into his home, or place her directly in the path of every enemy he had ever made. Vincent Moretti had spent years ensuring that emotions never influenced his decisions. In his world, hesitation was expensive. Trust could become betrayal overnight. Attachment could become leverage. Every weakness eventually found someone willing to exploit it. That belief had kept him alive. Yet now, against every instinct that had protected him for more than 2 decades, his thoughts kept returning to the same person. Not because she fascinated him, not because she sought his attention, but because she never seemed interested in the power surrounding his name. To Emma Carter, he was simply the quiet man who forgot to open his curtains. Emma remained completely unaware of the battle unfolding inside his mind. Life outside the estate continued to be as challenging as ever. Her aging car finally refused to start one chilly morning, forcing her to walk nearly 4 miles to catch a bus. The landlord reminded every tenant that rent would increase the following month. The grocery budget became smaller. Her shoes began showing cracks along the soles. Still, she refused to let hardship harden her spirit. On Saturdays, she continued volunteering at the neighborhood shelter. On Sundays, she visited the small cemetery where her parents rested side by side. Beneath a maple tree, she always brought fresh flowers. Never expensive ones. Just enough color to brighten the quiet corner where two people who had loved her unconditionally now slept forever. Kneeling beside the graves, Emma smiled through misty eyes. Things are getting a little better. The breeze gently stirred the grass. I think both of you would like the people I've been meeting. She paused. Well, most of them. A quiet laugh escaped her. For the first time in years, talking to her parents didn't feel entirely like speaking into silence. Something inside her had begun to heal. She simply didn't know why. Back at the estate, another unexpected change had begun. Vincent started coming home earlier. Robert noticed first. Board meetings ended before sunset. Late-night business dinners disappeared from the calendar. Even the staff exchanged curious glances whenever the front doors opened while daylight still filled the halls. One afternoon, Robert found Vincent standing beside the library window. You've been home more often. Vincent didn't turn around. Have I? Yes. Silence. Robert smiled faintly. The house appreciates it. Vincent looked toward the entrance hall where Emma was carefully arranging another bouquet of wildflowers. The house isn't the only thing changing. That afternoon, Emma entered the kitchen carrying a basket of fresh linens. She found the head chef staring hopelessly at a smoking oven. What happened? The chef sighed dramatically. Dessert. Emma peeked inside. The apple pie had become little more than black charcoal. She couldn't help laughing. It doesn't look that bad. The chef raised an eyebrow. It looks like evidence. Another cook groaned. Mr. Moretti invited guests tonight. Emma glanced around. Do you have apples? The chef blinked. Yes. Flour. Of course. Cinnamon. He nodded slowly. 20 minutes later, Emma rolled dough across the kitchen counter with practiced hands. The cooks watched in amazement. You can bake. My mother taught me. She smiled softly. She believed homemade pie could solve almost any problem. An hour later, the aroma drifted through the mansion. Warm apples, butter, vanilla, cinnamon. The scent reached Vincent's office. He paused in the middle of reading a document. For a brief moment, he wasn't standing inside a mansion. He was 17 years old again. His mother was laughing in a sunlit kitchen. Music played softly from an old radio. His younger sister stole apple slices from the cutting board. It had been over 20 years since that memory visited him so clearly. He quietly closed the file in front of him. When dinner concluded later that evening, he entered the kitchen. The staff immediately straightened. The pie. Everyone looked nervously toward the chef. It was excellent. Relief spread across every face. Vincent's gaze settled on Emma. You baked it. She nodded. The original plan didn't survive. A faint smile appeared. So I heard. Before leaving, he added quietly. Thank you. It wasn't merely gratitude for dessert. Emma somehow understood that. Days later, another surprise arrived. Emma discovered an old, upright piano, hidden beneath a protective cloth inside one of the sitting rooms. She gently removed the cover. Dust floated through streams of afternoon sunlight. The keys were slightly yellow with age. Curious, she pressed one gently. The note echoed warmly through the empty room. Another key, then another. Without realizing anyone was nearby, she began playing the simple melody her mother had taught her as a little girl. It wasn't perfect. Years had passed since she'd practiced. But the tune carried something more valuable than perfection. Memory. Outside the room, Vincent stopped walking. The music froze him where he stood. Robert approached quietly. I didn't know she played. Neither did I. Neither man interrupted. The melody filled the silent mansion in a way expensive artwork never had. When the final note faded, Emma noticed someone standing in the doorway. She immediately stood. I'm sorry. Vincent shook his head. For what? I wasn't supposed to. You woke the house. She looked confused. He glanced toward the piano. It hasn't been played since. His sentence faded unfinished. Emma sensed painful memories hiding behind those words. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she gently placed the cloth back over the instrument. If you'd rather I didn't. Vincent surprised both of them. Leave it uncovered. She smiled. It deserves to be heard. So do you. The words escaped before Vincent seemed to realize he'd spoken them. Emma lowered her eyes, suddenly unsure how to respond. A strange silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, simply unfamiliar. For the first time, neither of them felt like employer and employee. Just two lonely people standing in the same room. Elsewhere in the city, someone else had begun asking questions. Inside a dimly lit private club, the same two men who frequently visited. The estate sat across from another figure hidden by shadows. The housekeeper. One man slid a photograph across the table. Emma smiled in the picture while carrying groceries from a neighborhood market. She's ordinary. Exactly. The shadowed figure leaned forward. Ordinary people become extraordinary liabilities. Another photograph appeared. Emma leaving the homeless shelter. Emma buying flowers. Emma laughing with neighborhood children. Someone had been watching her for weeks. Vincent is changing. One man frowned. He leaves work early. He canceled meetings. He even smiled. The room grew silent. Finally, the hidden figure spoke. Every fortress has one gate. His finger rested on Emma's photograph. We found his. The danger reached the estate sooner than anyone expected. Late one Friday afternoon, Emma finished cleaning the upstairs hallway. Robert approached with unusual urgency. Mr. Moretti asked that you leave before dark. Emma frowned. I still have 2 rooms left. They can wait. His tone left no room for argument. As Emma gathered her things, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began falling in heavy sheets. I'll miss the last bus. Before Robert could answer, Vincent appeared at the front entrance. I'll have someone drive her. Emma immediately shook her head. That's not necessary. It wasn't a request. His voice remained calm rather than commanding. The weather is getting worse. Moments later, she found herself sitting in the back seat of one of the estate's black SUVs. The driver pulled away through the rain. Halfway across town, traffic slowed unexpectedly. Construction, flooded streets. Everything came to a stop. Emma gazed out the rain-covered window. She didn't notice the gray sedan several cars behind them. Inside that vehicle, a man lifted a phone. She's alone. The answer came instantly. Follow. The SUV eventually reached Emma's apartment building. She thanked the driver and hurried toward the entrance beneath her umbrella. The gray sedan remained parked across the street. Its headlights stayed off. A camera lens followed her until she disappeared inside. Only then did the vehicle quietly drive away. The next morning, Vincent received a plain envelope on his desk. No return address. Inside lay 3 photographs. Emma leaving her apartment. Emma volunteering. Emma standing beside her parents' graves. Across the final photograph, someone had written 6 chilling words. Everyone has something worth losing. For several long moments, Vincent said nothing. His jaw tightened. Then, without another word, he walked into Robert's office. Starting today, his voice was colder than Robert had heard in years. Emma Carter is no longer just an employee. Robert understood immediately. They found her. Vincent nodded once. And if they believe she'll lead them to me. He looked toward the rain falling beyond the windows. They're about to discover exactly how far. I'll go to keep an innocent person out of my world. But fate had already begun moving faster than either of them realized. Because at that very moment, Emma was opening her apartment door to find a small handwritten note resting on the welcome mat. It contained no signature, only a single sentence. You should stop working at the mansion before it's too late. Emma stood motionless in the narrow hallway outside her apartment, staring at the note in her trembling hands. You should stop working at the mansion before it's too late. No signature, no explanation. Just 8 words that turned an ordinary Saturday morning into something deeply unsettling. She looked up and down the street. Families walked their dogs. Children chased one another with soccer balls. An elderly couple carried grocery bags toward their car. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Yet someone had known exactly where she lived. Someone wanted her to be afraid. For several minutes, she remained frozen, listening to her own heartbeat. Then she folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Fear whispered that she should quit immediately. But another voice, the one her parents had nurtured since childhood, reminded her that fear should never make important decisions. Still, she couldn't ignore what had happened. The following Tuesday, Emma arrived at the estate earlier than usual. Robert met her at the entrance, and the moment he saw her expression, he knew something was wrong. Without a word, she handed him the folded note. His face lost all color as he read it. Where did you get this? Outside my apartment. When? Saturday morning. Robert closed his eyes briefly before asking quietly, "Did anyone follow you?" "I don't know." He looked toward the grand staircase. "Stay here." Moments later, Vincent descended the stairs. The confidence he normally carried disappeared the instant. Robert placed the note in his hand. He read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened. Finally, he looked at Emma. "I'm sorry." The word surprised her more than anything else. She had expected instructions. Perhaps questions. Not an apology. "You didn't write it," she replied gently. "No. But someone wrote it because of you." Silence settled between them. Then Vincent spoke with complete honesty. "The rumors you've heard about me." He paused. "Some are exaggerated." Emma listened carefully. "Some are true." She didn't interrupt. "There are people who believe hurting innocent people is an acceptable way to settle old scores." For the first time since meeting him, Emma saw something she had never expected in the eyes of the city's most feared man. Guilt. Not for himself. For her. "I'll resign," she said softly. Vincent immediately looked up. "If that's what keeps everyone safe." "No." His answer came without hesitation. Emma blinked. "You shouldn't have to abandon your livelihood because of my enemies. But if staying puts others at risk." "It doesn't." His voice remained calm. "It puts me at risk." She frowned. "I don't understand." Vincent looked toward the rain-covered windows. "For years I convinced myself I had nothing left to lose." He met her eyes. "That note proves I was wrong." Over the next several days, security around the estate quietly increased. Additional guards patrolled the grounds. Vehicles changed routes unpredictably. Robert personally ensured Emma never traveled alone when leaving work. She appreciated the precautions, but something troubled her even more. Vincent had become distant. Not cold. Protective. Whenever their paths crossed, he seemed to leave the room moments later. Conversations became shorter. The library remained empty. The piano sat untouched. It didn't take long for Emma to understand why. He believed staying away from her would keep her safe. Yet the silence hurt far more than either of them expected. One afternoon, while dusting the library, Emma found a small leather notebook tucked between two shelves. Thinking it belonged to Robert, she picked it up. Before she could leave the room, Vincent entered. His eyes widened slightly. "My notebook." "I'm sorry." She quickly offered it back. He accepted it, but something slipped from between its pages. A faded photograph drifted gently onto the floor. Emma instinctively bent to retrieve it. Before handing it back, she caught a brief glimpse. A smiling woman stood beside a teenage Vincent. Between them laughed a little girl no older than 8. Neither looked anything like the lonely man she now knew. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "You've lost people." Vincent stared at the photograph for several long moments. "My mother." He swallowed quietly. "My sister." The room fell silent. "They were killed because someone wanted to hurt my father." Emma's heart sank. Everything suddenly made sense. The empty rooms, the untouched piano, the fear of attachment, the constant walls around his heart. He hadn't become distant because he didn't care. He became distant because he cared too much. "I've spent half my life believing that loving someone only gives the world another target." Emma stepped closer. "My mother used to say something." He looked at her. "Closing every window may keep the storm outside." She smiled sadly. But eventually the flowers inside stopped growing too. Neither spoke again. Words were no longer necessary. For the first time in years, Vincent allowed someone to see the grief he had hidden beneath power and reputation. Days later, the danger everyone feared finally arrived. Emma finished volunteering at the neighborhood shelter just after sunset. As she walked toward the bus stop, she noticed the street unusually quiet. Too quiet. A black sedan rolled slowly beside the curb. Its tinted windows reflected the streetlights. The rear door opened. A calm voice spoke from inside. "Miss Carter." She stopped walking. "We only want to talk." Every instinct screamed at her to run. She turned. The moment she did, another man stepped from the opposite sidewalk. Her path was blocked. The world suddenly felt much smaller. "You've made a powerful man forget what's important," one of them said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "We think you do." Before either man could move closer, headlights flooded the street. 2 black SUVs accelerated around the corner. Brakes screeched. Doors flew open. Vincent's security team surrounded Emma within seconds. The strangers disappeared into their sedan before anyone could stop them. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet Emma's hands continued trembling long afterward. Vincent arrived minutes later. The instant he saw her unharmed, relief flashed across his face before disappearing beneath his usual composure. "You should have stayed away from me," Emma said quietly. "I tried." He looked at the empty street. It didn't matter. The following morning, Vincent made the most difficult decision of his life. He gathered every senior member of his organization inside the mansion. No raised voices echoed through the room. No threats. Only certainty. "My legitimate businesses remain." He looked around the table. "Everything else ends today." Several men stared in disbelief. One laughed. "You built an empire." Vincent nodded. "And now I'm choosing what kind of legacy survives me." Another leaned forward. "They'll see this as weakness." "No." Vincent's gray eyes hardened. "They'll see that I finally have something worth protecting." Within weeks, authorities witnessed something no one believed possible. Criminal operations quietly dissolved. Illegal partnerships disappeared. Entire networks collapsed without violence. Business analysts called it strategic restructuring. Only Robert knew the real reason. Love had succeeded where fear never could. Months passed. Spring returned to the city. The mansion slowly transformed. Curtains remained open. Fresh flowers stood in every room. Music drifted through the halls once more. The dining table finally welcomed guests instead of gathering dust. Employees laughed without glancing nervously over their shoulders. The fortress had become a home. One sunny afternoon, Emma stood in the garden planting white roses. Vincent joined her carrying another small pot. "I've never planted anything before." Emma smiled. "Then today seems like a good day to start." "I'm probably terrible at it." "So was I." Together they knelt in the soil. No bodyguards. No meetings. No fear. Just two people quietly building something neither had believed possible. A future. Vincent looked toward the mansion. "It finally feels alive." Emma brushed dirt from her hands. "It was always beautiful." She looked at him warmly. "It just needed someone willing to open the windows." He laughed. A genuine, unguarded laugh that echoed through the garden. Robert watched from the terrace with tears quietly gathering in his eyes. He had served the Moretti family for more than 30 years. He had witnessed power, wealth, loss, violence, but nothing compared to the miracle unfolding before him. A young woman hired to dust shelves and polish floors had accomplished what armies, fortunes, and influence never could. She had reminded a broken man that hearts were never meant to become prisons. 1 year later, the mansion hosted another gathering. This time there were children racing across the lawn, neighbors sharing homemade desserts, employees sitting beside executives as equals. Laughter filled every hallway. Near the entrance stood the same crystal vase that had once held fading lilies. Now it overflowed with simple yellow daisies and blue cornflowers. Exactly the kind Emma had first brought with her own money. Vincent noticed the bouquet and smiled. "They're still inexpensive." Emma slipped her hand into his. "They were never meant to impress anyone." He looked around the home that no longer echoed with silence. "They remind us where everything began." Sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with grand declarations or chants, encounters beneath dazzling lights. Sometimes they begin with a mop, a bucket, a handful of wildflowers, and a woman whose greatest strength isn't beauty, wealth, or power. It's kindness, because kindness asks for nothing in return. Yet somehow, it has the extraordinary power to restore what even time believes is beyond repair. Emma Carter had been hired to clean a mansion. Instead, she cleaned away years of loneliness, grief, and regret. And in healing one wounded heart, she finally found a place where her own could rest. Some houses are built with stone. Some families are built with blood. But the strongest homes of all are built by ordinary people who choose compassion every single day. And that was the greatest miracle hidden behind the gates of the Moretti estate. The end.